Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's your boy D Black coming back to you with another Raw review. Excuse me. All right, well, let me start off with saying that although we've always been complaining about Triple H and how he does a storyline, and how not well the shows have been and stuff like that, well, TKO just signed him again for another contract and he will be around for a few more years. So hopefully things will go better and everything, and that we'll start getting good shows and everything. but for Raw tonight, it had some good points, and and stuff, So it wasn't a bad show, but it wasn't a good show. So we're just gonna say that the show was mid and stuff. So we get started with Roman Reigns, and he's coming out and he's saying, to the Usos that, he's glad that they're on his side and everything, that he trusts them and stuff, and everything that happened with them in the past. He said he's going to leave it in the past, he's going to leave it there. And said that he needs, their thoughts, um, of what's going on between him and Jacob Fatu and stuff, I'm not sure where where Jacob is coming from. It says that, you know, um, he said on ESPN, that he's told everybody, on the roster and stuff like that, and family included and stuff, that Jacob Fatu knew, and everybody had like 2 years, to take advantage of him, taking the back seat to everything and stuff. Um, and then he pushed and procrastinated and stuff like that, talking about Jacob Fatu, and his opportunities, as far as, getting getting the championship, you know, and then he claimed, and then Roman said that, he climbed the mountain, he beat, CM Punk, and now he's, won the championship, and now Jacob, Fatu, is trying to take all that from him. And then Jimmy tells him that, he didn't disagree on what Roman was saying, but he also didn't. He doesn't disagree. He also agrees with Jacob. Saying that Jacob, wants to upgrade, his house and everything and stuff like that. And he said that he gets it, for all that and everything because who doesn't want to upgrade? And then he says that but it shouldn't come at the cost, of Jacob coming after Roman Reigns, you know, um, for the title, saying that Jacob is saying that Jacob is a different breed and stuff like that. I mean, we do have Cody Rhodes who just said that he opened up a challenge to somebody and said that he's easy to find, and hard to beat. So why ain't Jacob going over in that direction and stuff like that, as far as what, the Usos are saying and what Roman is saying, and then Jay says that, Jacob is dangerous, because, last week what happened is that on his own, Jacob took out the MFTs and stuff on his own. Then Jay is saying that, if he beats Roman Reigns, then Jacob gets the hula fala, the family name, and then Jacob gets to call all the shots and stuff. He's going to be the shot caller. Jay saying that there has to be consequences, and Roman says yes, consequences. And they don't do charity and stuff. And tells the Usos, he's going to think about everything that they said and stuff like that, and then address it later on. You know, tonight in the show. And then they went out and said, love and respect, family first. Roman says the first family, and they go on with that. Then we get the segment with Seth Rollins and stuff. Seth comes out, saying that the reason why he lost his match at WrestleMania, to Gunther, um, and that is not that Gunther was better than him. then says that there's a reason why Roman Reigns was walking around with the championship and stuff, and that it's not because Roman Reigns pinned him, pinned his shoulders, to the mat, and the reason it is because he blames Braun Breaker, and then he calls Braun Breaker out, and the Seth tells Braun Breaker that he gave him everything on a silver platter and stuff like that, and then Braun Breaker repaid him by taking everything away from him, saying that Braun is the reason why um, he had to forfeit, the title and everything, and then they took him out and stuff. And the reason he actually the reason why he did it to main event, he cost him for main event in WrestleMania and stuff. Then he asked the reason why he did it and stuff like that. So then Seth says, to Braun, for what and everything, and they just go on and just talk and everything and stuff like that and everything. Then Braun Breaker says to Seth, um, that basically that he didn't give him anything, that he earned what he did, and that he wasn't looking for anything from Seth Rollins and stuff like that. He said that the only reason that Seth had him out there and stuff, they said they came out, him and Bronson Reed came out to fight Seth's battles, and put out fires that Seth started and stuff like that until, and he says that they, were like his little lackeys and stuff like that, and that, he needed them, to accomplish the things that, Seth has done, as far as, the business is concerned. And then he goes on to tell that, that he didn't need, you know, Seth Rollins, that he needed, the guidance from Paul Heyman and stuff, And then Seth says to Braun, you need, that, he's kind of dumbfounded, said that he needed Paul Heyman, and then he called Paul Heyman a dried up sack of meat and stuff, and and then he goes on and just goes and tries to, they go at each other and everything and stuff like that. And then Seth says that Braun tries and but he succeeds, and then he says um that he bet, Braun. I mean, Seth saying that he betted on himself and everything, and they got him a championship. And then he told Braun that he betted, on himself, but he betted on Paul Heyman, and he got Austin Theory and Logan Paul. And then he said all Paul Heyman did was got him some steaks and doggone and a happy ending, and stuff like that. Oh man, so then again, Seth says that, hey, Braun Breaker tries and that he succeeds and stuff. And then Braun Breaker says that before all this happened, that he became a main eventer with he could become a main eventer with or without Seth Rollins and stuff like that. But we know it's not true. Then he goes on to tell Seth Rollins that he's a main eventer. He's the first draft Hall of Famer and stuff like that. So they're giving each other compliments and stuff like that. You know, and stuff. Then he gets down, and he tells Seth that he's the best in the world at being number two. And then Seth, goes up and tells him that, he was, good at everything that he said and stuff like that and stuff. Then he actually called Big Papa Pump, which is his father, Scott Steiner, and stuff. And and then he said that he asked him for the hookup and stuff like that. And then he challenges him, for at Backlash and stuff. And then he said that he was going to give him the opportunity, you know, but he tells Braun Breaker that he's not ready. Then he says that the match that he's going to have at Backlash is going to give the opportunity for Seth. I mean, for Braun Breaker to prove to Seth that he is ready and everything like that. You know, and then he says, to Braun Breaker, he said, "Let me tell you a secret that, you know, everybody knows, but he doesn't." And he calls him Baby Steiner, that he's not even number two in his whole family. That's crazy. And throws the mic at Paul Heyman and then walks off. So he kind of degraded, Braun Breaker and stuff. So we'll see what happens at Backlash on how that match is going to go and everything. Then we get Penta and Rusev. This match was kind of okay. Kind of figured it was going to happen because of all the stuff that happened at, the ladder match and stuff. I thought more less it would have been Javon Evans and stuff like that, but Rusev and Penta have already wrestled against each other and stuff like that. And Penta's gotten actually really on 1-1. I don't know if he's even beaten Rusev, but then again tonight he does beat Rusev in the roll up and everything and stuff like that. Um, and then after he wins the match, then Rusev attacks him and stuff like that. And then Ethan Page, comes out and then he attacks, Penta with Rusev and stuff like that. And then out comes Javon Evans, and then they brawl, and then they brawl, and then they brawl. And then Javon Evans gives Rusev another OG cutter. Um, and it takes Rusev out and everything. And then they get out of the ring. Rusev and Lisa Page, and then Javon Evans and Penta standing strong. So I figured next week there's going to be a tag match and stuff. And then we get El Grande Americano. I guess he's making a master mass challenge to the original Grande Americano. Um, Sometime, I guess next week. I guess AAA is going to have something on TV. I mean, on YouTube and stuff. So I guess at that match, and then he goes ahead and makes a challenge to Rey Mysterio because he said that he wants to fight the best. So El Grande Americano, gives a challenge to Rey Mysterio, and they had that match later on, in the evening. And then we got Becky Lynch coming out and everything, saying that she finally got rid of, AJ Lee and started talking all that crazy stuff and everything, and saying about what Sports Illustrated and all that other stuff happened. And Becky, makes an open challenge and stuff. Says that she wants to be, a more on TV and fighting champion and everything. So she makes an open challenge to somebody to come out, and then Io Sky comes out and stuff, and then they're talking crap, and then Becky is saying that Io, as far as how Io is, and then how she was with Rhea, and then she said if Rhea's gonna come help her, as she gonna fight Rhea Ripley, for the Intercontinental title, because Io and Rhea, were good friends and stuff like that. So on and on with that, and then Nick Aldis comes out and he makes a match between Becky Lynch, and Io Sky and stuff. And before the referee comes out, Becky jumps on Io. She, kind of beats her up and stuff like that. And then the match goes on. Then they have the match with Becky Lynch and Io Sky. The match goes on. It's a pretty decent match and stuff. And everything. And then all of a sudden, Oscar comes out. She trips Io and stuff like that. And then the referee, when she was breaking it up, I understand why the referee didn't, why would she just stand up and all of a sudden she's on the ground, on the mat and stuff like that. And then after Oscar interferes, then Becky manhandle slams Io Sky and wins the match. Then after the match is over with, then Oscar comes in and Oscar kind of beats up um, Io. and stuff. So, and that goes on for there and stuff like that. Then we get the Usos with LA Knight in the back and stuff, and then LA Knight is just telling Jimmy and Jay, he's telling Jay that he was main event Jay Uso. He went on to win the championship, and then he won the Royal Rumble and stuff like that, and why they still under Roman Reigns and stuff like that, and then so we'll see what happens. Basically, more or less, I think Jimmy and Jay or one of the two are going to end up in the match against LA Knight because basically LA Knight says if the bloodline is together, then there's a problem. You know, it's his business now and stuff. And then we get the segment with Joe Hendry. Joe Hendry is singing come out and start singing the song, have a little concert and stuff, and he's singing the song about how he signed with Raw and everything. And then he says, um, he says to fire Logan Paul and stuff like that. And then he gets the crowd, to start singing, fire Logan Paul and stuff like that. And then Logan Paul and Austin Theory, they come out and stuff. And then Logan Paul is saying, "You can't fire me, you can't fire me," and stuff like that. And everything, and then they attack, Joe Hendry, and they kind of beat him up and everything, and then all of a sudden the Street Profits come out, and then they just brawl, they just brawl. The Street Profits, take out, and Joe Hendry, they take out, Austin Theory and Logan Paul, and they stand strong in the ring, and Logan Paul and Austin Theory, are outside the ring. So I'm sure that there's something that's going to be coming up with them guys, as far as matches are concerned and stuff. And then we got Grayson Waller, with Adam Pierce, and he's telling Adam Pierce that he needs an opportunity and stuff like that. And he said over, and then he looked back, and there's over Femi out, on the side. And then over Femi says that if you want an opportunity, make it a match. And so there was a match that's going to be started, with Obafemi and Grayson Waller, which is going to be crazy. And then we got Rey Mysterio going against El Grande Americano. I mean, the match is okay. It's good to see Rey Mysterio out there and everything still has it. After all these years, with Rey in the ring and stuff like that, I mean, Ray still got it. I think he still got a few more years in, but I think he might go ahead and call it quits here in a couple of years and stuff like that. And then Bravo, trips Ray, and then Ryo tries to give El Grande Americano, that little metal piece that they put in his face mask and stuff like that. And then the original Americano comes out and everything. He tries to take the little metal piece away from him. Ray hits El Grande Americano, which bumps into the original Americano and stuff like that. And then Ray sets him up, hits him with a 619, and then he gives him a splash and stuff like that, and he wins the match. And then we got Grayson Waller with the match with Obafemi, and Obafemi just destroys Grayson Waller and everything. And then Obafemi says, he gives an open challenge to anybody in the back, if they want the opportunity, he's given an open challenge, to come face him, Obafemi, you know. And he said, you come out and step up and everything. You step up and you better be good when you come out. And stuff. So we're gonna see who's gonna do that, how they're gonna run this. You know, Triple H is at the helm. I hope he doesn't do anything that's gonna really destroy Obafemi. You got to keep Obafemi strong. So who's Obafemi now? Because it's never said where Obafemi signed with. I mean, he's having his matches on Raw, but did he sign a contract to be on Raw? Or will he sign a contract and go to SmackDown and then eventually challenge Cody Rhodes at SummerSlam and then take that title and win that title. We'll have to see what happens there. And then we get Judgment Day and stuff. Oh yeah, let me go back. Before the Seth Rollins thing, we had the attack with the Judgment Day on Stephanie Valkyria, and they beat Stephanie up. Raquel attacked her, and then Liv, is going to saying that this is her title and everything, and then they leave Stephanie Valkyria just lying. And then with the segment, with the Judgment Day, you have Liv, Roxanne, and Raquel, and then Liv is saying to Raquel, that she wants to talk to Roxanne and everything. And then she apologizes, for the things that happened to, Finn Balor, saying that, Finn is the one that, got Roxanne there and everything. And then, they was telling Roxanne, that they're family and everything, and that Finn is, the outsider, trying to look in and stuff like that. And then she asks, Roxanne, does she trust her and stuff like that, and that she's, and then Liv says that she's gonna go out there, be outside the ring when her and Raquel take, on Bayley and Lyra Valkyria later on and stuff like that. And then Liv leaves, and then Finn Balor comes in. And he tells Roxanne to, not speak up loud and everything. And he tells Roxanne, not to trust Liv and everything, because Liv was probably going to turn, they're going to turn on her and everything, and then try to kick her out, the Judgment Day. But it was good to see that the people liked Raquel. I mean, not Raquel, but liked Roxanne and stuff. They, some yeah, yeah, yeah. So they loved her. The crowd loved her because it was in her hometown and stuff like that. So they gave her some good support. Glad to see that. Then we had the match with Bayley and Lyra Valkyria, against Roxanne, Perez, and Raquel Rodriguez. The match goes on. It's a pretty decent, it was okay match. We're already seen this match about 4 or 5 times, maybe more, and stuff like that. Liv Morgan gets involved and everything. Then Roxanne ends up pot rocking, Bayley, for the win. I think Bayley is on her way out because now they've been just jobbing Bayley out and stuff, So hate to see that, but it is what it is, you know. And then we get Roman Reigns in the last segment, saying that, that they made, the title, in spite of him and everything, saying that, the title doesn't make the man makes the title and stuff like that. And that's, that's what he did with the title. He made the title now because he said he made the title, he put it in the main event at WrestleMania and stuff like that. As far as night 2 WrestleMania and stuff, that's what he beat CM Punk, for the title and everything, and then he just made the title, what it is again and stuff, So he made the title relevant, is what he's saying and stuff. That's what he's gonna do and everything, and that people can respect the title, So he's trying to bring a name back to the title like he did, you know, um, when he was champion for 1,300 days and stuff. I tell you. So we're going to see what happens with the bloodline. And then Jacob Fatu, um, comes out, you know, um, and then Roman tells Jacob that he gave him, a week, to think about, what he was going to do and stuff like that, and that he hoped that Jacob, made the right choice and, not become, not to, made a choice not to divide the family, but to unite the family. And Jacob, says that he gave, sarcastically, he tells Roman that, hey, you gave me a week. And he said he didn't need a week, he didn't need a day, he didn't need an hour, you know. Um, or anything like that. He's saying that he's coming at the title is like he told him last week. He said he doesn't want the title. He said that he needs the title and everything. He didn't stutter when he said it and stuff like that. So, you know, and then they go on and on and on and everything. And the Roman basically, tells Jacob, that he's not ready. He doesn't deserve it and everything. That he's not giving out a charity or anything like that. That he has to earn it. Has to, you know, and stuff. So he issues him a challenge at Backlash. And then Jacob says that well, actually, Roman tells him that after he's telling him that he doesn't deserve it and everything and stuff like that, and he says that it's a shame that he's allowing him to compete against him and stuff like that, and he called it nepotism, you know, and he can't do it and stuff like that, and then Jay just snapped and he choked Roman Reigns and everything, and he choked them out and stuff. So, basically they have the match, at Backlash that's going to be coming up and stuff like that, and as Jacob was walking off, you know, he says that Roman said that he'll see him at Backlash, but Jacob says that, he'll see him next week, on Raw, so I mean, I don't know. We're gonna see. But anyway, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment. Let me know how you're feeling and everything like that. So with that, thank you for watching. God bless, deuces, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.